closely related to yellowjackets, hornets are the largest species of wasps in the world. They behave just like any other species of wasp by building communal nests from wood pulp. These nests vary wildly in size depending on how well the colony is thriving in a particular area, and can be built virtually anywhere that provides enough shelter. In warmer climates, they can last all year round, but elsewhere, they're abandoned during winter before being rebuilt the next year. It's time to put on your protective gear. Let's take a look at the top 15 biggest hornets' nests ever found. Number 15. Underground hive. While you may normally expect to find a hornet's nest in a tree or perhaps the rafters of a house, they'll choose anywhere that provides enough protection for the queen and the eggs, and this can be even a pre-existing cavity underground. This is a frightening example of just how huge one can get, and on this occasion, it's believed the hornets made use of the burrow that had been previously dug by rabbits. As you can see, the nest has been formed with a number of different layers, using similar honeycomb-type structure as bees do. The hornets are able to use wood pulp to create an extremely sturdy structure, so much so that it keeps its cohesiveness even when it's picked up. Despite wearing protective clothing, these workers have to be extremely careful because the size of these hornets suggests their stings could be up to an inch or several centimeters long, which would easily be able to penetrate most types of fabric. Most surprising of all, though, is the sheer size of their eggs, which are the white objects that line the bottom of their nest, and can be seen inside the different layers. Each one of these is just a few days away from hatching, and had this nest not been removed, the colony could have easily grown in size as to many as 1,000 individuals. Number 14. Louisiana shed nest. With its moist but warm environment, Louisiana produces an ideal climate for hornets to flourish. But even experts who are used to removing nests were surprised when they were called in to remove the one that had been built in a shed in the town of Patterson. Described as being the size of a small refrigerator, the insects were clearly getting angry at what was happening and began to swarm around anyone that was nearby. On the recording, you can hear them flying into the microphone and creating a noise that sounds similar to a heavy rainfall. But each one of those thuds is in fact a hornet that's ready to sting. In this instance, it almost took an hour for the full nest to be removed and disposed of, and even someone experienced in something like this will be stung a few times. Luckily, the exterminators found the queen and removed her too, otherwise she would have simply started a new nest somewhere else. But as for the other hornets, without a nest or a queen, they'll have died off within a few days. This may seem harsh, but a huge nest like this could be seriously life-threatening, especially to someone who has allergies to stings. Still, authorities try to carefully balance how many nests are actually removed, because while they can be a nuisance, hornets also play an important role in local ecosystems. Number 13. Chinese drone removal. Hornets can build nests almost anywhere, and in rural areas it's quite common for them to be put in the upper reaches of a tree. This, of course, is to minimize the chance that a predator will be able to reach them, but it also makes it extremely difficult for humans to remove them if the presence of the hornets is becoming problematic. In 2020, the residents of a village in the Zhong County near the Chinese city of Chongqing found it almost impossible to go outside because there were so many hornets buzzing around, and it turned out that rather than being the result of just one nest, there were as many as 100 in the surrounding forest. This isn't too uncommon an event in some regions of China, and one of the services offered by the country's largest non-governmental organization, which is called Blue Sky Rescue, is able to help deal with their increasing numbers. Rather than sending workers up the trees to try to remove the nests, Blue Sky Rescue has been harnessing technology to make the process simpler and managed to raise around $15,000 from donations to buy a drone, which they then modified to carry a gas tank and nozzle. In what is possibly the world's first drone-mounted flamethrower, they were able to use it to fly up into the tree canopy and burn the nests without risking the safety of anyone. Number 12. First murder hornets of 2021. So-called murder hornets are a species of hornet that's known officially as the Asian giant hornet, and it's not only the largest in the world, but one of the most aggressive. In recent years, they've been spreading to new places, and there are now concerns about increasing populations of them across the United States. While a single sting isn't normally dangerous, unless you're allergic to them, they can often swarm and deliver multiple stings at once, and this can often lead to a trip to the ER. Furthermore, they can have a catastrophic impact on ecosystems that have developed without their presence, particularly in the way they hunt and decapitate bees. So whenever a nest is found, it has to be removed. The first murder hornet nest to be discovered in 2021 was found at the base of a dead alder tree in Whatcom County, Washington, in August of that year, and authorities were surprised by just how big it already was so early in the season. Made up of 9 comb layers, there were at least 1,500 hornets in different stages of development, and the removal team caught 113 workers from the nest and a further 67 from the surrounding area. They had found the nest thanks to a report of a hornet sighting earlier in the week and more than a quarter of a mile away. And while this was a great success, it's likely there are many more that still need to be found. Number 11. Indian hornets. Asian giant hornets are rapidly expanding around the world, and with its warm conditions, certain regions of India are seeing more than ever. While insects usually live for around 6 months before hibernating and rebuilding a nest the following year, they are able to live year-round in India, which leads to the development of unbelievably huge nests. It's quite a common sight near rural villages to spot the telltale sign of a hornet crawling along the ground, and if you do see one, you're likely never too far away from its nest. Often built underground near buildings where the loose soil can be easily excavated by the hornets, nests of several thousand individuals are frequently discovered. The response in India isn't necessarily the same as it is in China or the United States, however. While you might expect them to do everything it takes to remove the nests, this is only something that'll happen if it's perilously close to where people are living. That's because in places like Manipur, hornets are one of the most popular traditional delicacies, and they certainly don't want to waste them with mass extermination methods. Instead, they catch them in the same way that they have for centuries, and this in itself acts as a natural control on their numbers. Number 10. Bald-faced hornet's nest. Bald-faced hornets are a species that's native to North America and are technically a type of yellow-jacket wasp and aren't considered to be a true hornet. Nevertheless, growing up to an inch or a few centimeters in length and easily identifiable by their black and white markings, they can still be unnerving if you come across them in large numbers. They build their nests in the same way as other hornet species from wood pulp. These can usually be up to 14 inches, or about 36 centimeters across, and 28 inches or 58 centimeters tall. But in a particularly successful year, they will become much larger than this. Inside the nest, which is covered by a papery layer, there are hundreds of hexagonal combs, which can each host an egg and provide it with everything it needs to reach maturity. A nest like this can contain as many as 700 workers at a time and must be treated with extreme caution. If they feel at risk, they'll all swarm out and begin attacking anything in their way, which means they should only ever be removed by professionals. Luckily, at nighttime the insects are far more docile than during the day, so this is by far the best time to deal with them. Number 9. Asian hornet nest. The most famous species of hornet that's talked about the most is the Asian giant hornet. But there are a number of other varieties that originate in a similar region and are also spreading around the world, one of which is the Asian hornet. Growing to around half the size of their more notorious cousins, the queens typically measure up to 1.2 inches or about 3 centimeters long, and the workers grow to around 0.9 inches or about 2.4 centimeters in length. Looking like large wasps, they are a social species that will build huge nests to accommodate, in some instances, several thousand individuals at once. The nests are normally egg-shaped and are well hidden, just like the one in this video that was built within the undergrowth on some scrubland. If you ever see one of these, which can be up to 6 feet or 2 meters in size, the best bet is to stay well clear and call a professional, because one wrong move could result in you being swarmed. The one here has already been treated with a slow-acting insecticide, which ensures that all members of the colony are affected, and when it's fully taken its course, it's then safe to carefully remove the whole structure. Number 8. The car nest. It seems there isn't anywhere that hornets will refuse to build a nest, as long as it's in a relatively quiet place where they won't be disturbed too often. So you can imagine this homeowner's surprise when they opened the door to their Chevy El Camino and found a gigantic hornet's nest inside. Seemingly beginning in the car's headliner and going all the way down to the driver's seat into the cushion, the species responsible for this is the European hornet, which can grow to around an inch or about 2.5 centimeters long. Almost looking like the size of a person who has been wrapped in brown paper, this nest is a particularly large example, and it's likely home to several thousand insects. There's no way to simply start removing something like this, even if you're wearing protection, because the onslaught of so many hornets would be overwhelming. You may think there would be a chemical-free way of dealing with it, such as blocking up the entrances. The hornets are constantly adapting their nests to deal with wind and rain and would simply chew open another access route somewhere else. On this occasion, the only option was to begin by spraying insecticide into the open holes of the nest and wait for it to begin taking effect. And only then is it safe to start pulling it apart. Number 7. Oriental hornet nest. The Oriental hornet is one of the smaller species of hornet, growing to around 3/4 of an inch or about 1.8 centimeters long. That's not all that's unusual about them though, because you'll notice they have an unusual coloration, which includes a single yellow stripe to the rear that amazingly is used to absorb sunlight to provide extra energy. Unlike other species, Oriental hornets are quite particular about where they'll build their nests and will normally choose an opening at the base of a tree so they can dig further underground. This means that whenever you see an opening, you can never be certain quite how large the nest truly is, and this can be a real danger if you're looking to remove it. In their natural environment, they're an essential part of the ecosystem, but their love of hunting and feeding on bees means that they need to be removed if they try to establish themselves anywhere else. They have a particularly painful sting, and with as many as 3,000 individuals being supported by a single nest, so are more than capable of inflicting serious injury or even death on anyone that disturbs them. Number 6. European hornet woodland nest. European hornets are, as the name would suggest, native to regions across Europe and can also be found across America after they were accidentally introduced by settlers in the 19th century. Growing to between 1 and 1.5 inches or about 2.5 to 3.6 centimeters long, they're a highly aggressive species that will attack at the first sign of trouble. As with most hornets, they'll build their nests anywhere that it's convenient for them, but they're particularly adapted to building them in woodland areas. This is probably because that's where they'll find the best supply of wood to build their nests from, and also means that colonies often grow to much larger numbers than they do elsewhere. By building them with a mixture of plant material and saliva, they are incredibly sturdy structures and will often reach far underground because they prefer to work in the dark. It's not too uncommon then to see a few hornets gathered around an entrance in a woodland area like this one, which is in the base of a sweet chestnut tree. You might think at first that it's just a couple of individuals that are foraging. In reality, though, these are the ones guarding the entrance to a much larger subterranean structure that contains many thousands of them. Number 5. Behind the wall. Hornets like to build their nests in quiet, dark places, and while they're able to cover their structures in a paper-like substance to blot out the light, they prefer to choose a location that's in as much shade as possible. That's why they'll quite often establish colonies in human structures, like in the corners of a barn or a shed. But the family who owned the home in this video were in for a much bigger surprise. They had for weeks heard a buzzing sound inside and thought at first it was simply a fly or a wasp that was flying around the house. The noise got louder, busier, and more constant, and suddenly they noticed that a hole was beginning to appear in one of their walls. It turns out that a hornet queen had entered the space behind one of the walls and chosen that as the place to set up her nest, and they were now devouring the house to collect more material and to make more space to continue building. When the exterminator arrived, he had to carefully remove the piece of cardboard that the family had attached to the wall to contain the hornets, and the full extent of what was being built could be seen. The nest was more than 3 feet or a meter tall, which is much larger than human children that lived in the home. It's perhaps only when you see a nest like this that you can truly understand the risk that hornets pose, especially around vulnerable people or young children, and why it's so important to remove them. Number 4. Tree nest. While hornets will quite happily build their nests in a tree, it's normally quite rare for them to reach huge proportions because there's so much risk involved in a location like that. However, if they manage to last the entire summer without any incidents, they may well become supersized. And after a particularly long and warm summer in Georgia in 2018, an exterminator was called in to deal with this large nest on a tree in farmland. It's so big that you can see the circles of the paper structure, and you can get an idea of how heavy it is by the bow in the tree's branches. The temptation, of course, may be to try to simply knock it off with a long stick, but the problem you then have is, first of all, an angry swarm of hornets, and second, a queen that will likely just find a new spot and start a new nest. Again, the removal of this nest involved the use of insecticide that was sprayed into an opening, and after a few hours, all of the hornets were gone. It was then simply a case of pulling the nest down to the ground and emptying it to ensure the queen hadn't survived. Number 3. Huge underground nest. It takes a certain type of bravery to head into the unknown to deal with a particularly troublesome hornet nest. The workers in this video take that to a completely different level. With the insects particularly fond of building their structures underground, you can never be entirely sure how large a nest is until you dig into it. And once you start, you've got to keep on going until you reach the end. At first, they had thought this would be a routine removal and dug into the side of the hill to take out a regular-sized nest. It soon became apparent that there was more to this particular one than it seemed at first, and virtually the entire mound was filled with large hornets. As they dig deeper in, they become swarmed with many thousands of the insects and finally reveal the comb structure that makes up the core of the nest. After removing the pieces, which were holding hundreds if not thousands of large white eggs, they were finally able to capture the queen and take her away. It apparently took several more days before all of the hornets had finally dissipated, and with a nest that size, it's no wonder the locals had been having such an issue with them. Number 2. The highway nest in Tel Aviv. Because of their ability to convert sunlight into energy, Oriental hornets are of particular interest to researchers to see if any of the mechanisms they use to do that can be replicated for our own energy production. It's for this reason that in Israel, if a suspected Oriental hornet's nest is found, then every attempt is made to safely remove it so it can be taken to a laboratory for study. That's what's happening in this video, after drivers along a highway leading into Tel Aviv had reported encountering a number of the insects. After weeks of investigating, the nest was finally discovered, and experts were sent to carefully extract it. From the moment they started digging into the earth, the sky begins to fill up with swarming hornets, and the combs they finally remove are surprisingly large for this particular species. In all, this nest probably had a population of around 700 to 800 individuals, which could have been extremely dangerous if they had decided to swarm onto the road. Number 1. The first murder hornet nest in the United States. When hornet eggs are laid, the unfertilized ones turn into males, and the fertilized ones turn into females. It's only the females that develop a stinger, but to further this, they each have the potential to turn into a queen. This means that in the right conditions, a large number of queens can be spawned from a single nest, and this allows them to spread much faster. That was the concern faced by the authorities in Washington state in 2020 when they found this nest, which was the first ever murder hornet nest to be found in the U.S. Found in a tree in Whatcom County, it's said to be the size of a basketball. And while this isn't as large as they can potentially become, researchers were amazed at what they found inside. To understand how much of a risk the murder hornets pose, they conducted a careful inventory of the contents and discovered 190 larvae that had developed from the eggs, 108 pupae, which were almost fully developed hornets, 112 workers, and nearly 200 queens that were preparing to leave the nest and set up their own. Experts couldn't believe how fortunate their timing was, because had these queens gotten out before they arrived to remove the nest, they would have hibernated over the winter and begun to build up their nest the following year. By that time, it would have been impossible to stop them, and they would have had to wait until they received reports of swarms before they could begin to try to track them down. Watch our Animals playlist for more top 15 videos about animals. Sit back, relax, and binge watch all of our best animal-related videos.